If you're here, you already sense there's something out there, something magical and mysterious, just waiting for you to find. And you've probably already discovered it isn't as easy as just thinking happy thoughts. You're not alone. Generations of shamans, philosophers, seers, and scientists have pursued this eternal quest. Where their ideas come together, you'll find powerful tools to cultivate magic and self-mastery in your own life. Welcome to the Magic and Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Donna Woodwell. I'm a former journalist and author, a master astrologer, and a hermetic initiate, and it's my honor to be your guide. In each episode, I'll meet you at the crossroads of science and spirit, reason and intuition, to help you discover the wisdom that works for you. Are you ready? The adventure awaits. Hello and welcome back to the next episode of Magic and Mastery. This is episode 19. Here come the UFOs. Yes, seriously, we are going to have an out of this world episode. If you haven't been watching the news lately, you might not have noticed there's a lot of little bits of information coming out of the U.S. government right now about, of all things, UFOs. Come out of pandemic and it's like, wow, things have really changed out there. And it's because in the appropriations that were signed into law in December of 2020 require the federal government in the United States to disclose what they know or what they can at least release into the public about UFOs within 6 months. And so their 6 months are up in June of 2021, which means sometime within the next 4 weeks, the Defense Department of the United States will be releasing a publicly available document and having to present it to the U.S. Congress about all the things that they have documented about UFOs over the last 70 years or so. So I thought it would be a perfect time to take on the subject of UFOs, flying saucers, or as the United States federal government prefers to talk about it, UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. Because it's so pregnant with possibilities that make us redefine our understanding of our place in the cosmos, our definitions of reality, and how we deal with concepts of truth as well as uncertainty. So, Chris, are you excited?
Just excited listening to that intro. That's fantastic. And it's hard not to think about serious when you're talking about seriously. So this is a perfect time for that.
It's a perfect time. And before we dive into this, let me just remind everyone that we will have lots of goodies in the show notes of this episode because Chris and I have both been doing some research. I'm sure we're going to be dropping names and books and all kinds of things you may want to check out on your own. So make sure before you leave today that you surf on over to the show notes at www.magicandmastery.com/podcast and check out the stuff that we talk about in this episode so that you can do your own research as we all go into this historic moment when the U.S. government finally, officially, that's my air quotes, officially, fesses up to the fact that things are going on over our heads that we cannot explain. Chris, I know you have some personal experience with UFOs from your past job and your personal life. You want to start with talking about your feelings on the topic and what you're thinking about what's coming up this summer.
Yeah, thank you for that. That it is really interesting, and I did find it's kind of humorous that it was attached to the second stimulus bill when that was passed. Would you say back in December it was?
Yes.
Yeah. Like so long ago, but it wasn't. So it's exciting. I mean, but this is also a lot of stuff that's been kind of leaking and going out there for a number of years. You know, at the Senate and Congress, there's been disclosure movements and you know, slowly trying to release U.S. documents. So the topic itself has always intrigued me. I was always kind of a skeptical person, but I was always open-minded to it. So back like, good gosh, back in like 2012, 2013, primarily when I was working with like Reality Sandwich days, like we put out a lot of counterculture kind of information, and crop circle community and the UFO community was a part of that because it's all tied together with whether you're talking about entheogens and plant spirits and shamanism to UFOs and crop circles and to lost civilizations and things like that. There's always this overlap of this hub of mystery that I find intriguing. So I was able to work with a lot of the researchers and just, listen to what they had to say. And it's actually just really interesting. The level of work that kind of goes into this field and the documentation is pretty impressive, particularly with crop circles. Because I always think like, oh, those are cool geometric patterns. Those are kind of fun. And are they fake? Are they real? And the reality of those kind of spoke to my more artistic kind of leanings, where there's this abstract language and symbolism that's being kind of conveyed by some sort of agency to relay information. And I think we talked about that on several episodes. Maybe it was the episode on the power of words, where we're talking about dream imagery and how that's a language in itself. And and that is like an abstract language too. But then the research on the ground around it, I forget like what the particular sediment is called that's always there right after a crop circle. It's very magnetic and super interesting. But just those levels of detail and, I think also when you're kind of going into, as a researcher, investigating these fields that are automatically closed down or you meet a lot of closed-minded people with trying to convey different arguments, because what we talked about a little bit before the show is that we have these ingrained sort of reality constructs, reality bubbles, you like to call them, and that we kind of latch to them. And it's almost a survival mechanism where we got to really vet the information kind of coming in. But how do we remain loose and malleable to new information? So like the arguments would be extremely well documented. And it's hard to kind of really dispute. I mean, of course, like in any of these fields, there's illegitimate sightings and illegitimate phenomena that's misunderstood. But then there is this whole wider expanse that we are in this massive galaxy, this massive universe. So it does seem to be a little bit silly to just outright say like, oh no, like, life outside of Earth doesn't exist, or things like that. And particularly when, if we look at our own oceans, I mean, we know more about our solar system than we do about the Earth's oceans. And that is just a perfect metaphor in itself.
I think that's a Carl Sagan quote, that there are more stars in our cosmos than all of the grains of sand on all of the beaches on Earth. And so we can't rationally conceive of how enormous the cosmos is. And so I find the argument that we are alone in this vast, complex cosmos, which in the last 30 or 40 years, we recognize that the process of life is more prevalent than we ever imagined, that we are spotting planets all over the place. We've already identified thousands of exoplanets. It seems like at least half the stars that we see have something orbiting around them. The amount of hubris it would take to think that humans are the only things of some level of consciousness in our cosmos is just, astronomical. Just astronomical.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up the hubris of that perspective, because I was actually thinking about the same thing. And it's also because the way we're biologically evolved to perceive reality is also just extremely limited. We take it for granted that there are light waves and sound waves just passing beyond our spectrum that we can biologically see. And of course, our scientific instrumentation is allowing us to have a wider scope and a wider vision. But it's also just, how do we actually define what life is when we're just kind of we're particularly looking for a specific type of life, one that mirrors our own experience, which isn't doesn't have to be the case. Like, not everything's just going to be, humans out in space.
That brings up an excellent point about the human consciousness. We see a small sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Right.
There's all kinds of slow things that we don't see. There's all kinds of faster wave frequencies that we don't see. Just a tiny sliver in the middle. Our perceptions are so narrow, and yet we don't think about that. So we mentioned it in a few episodes ago that there's more dark matter and dark energy in the cosmos that we can't measure than matter that we see. You know, they think about 95% of what's out there, we don't know how to measure. We know it's there because we see its footprints, but we don't know what it is, and we can't measure it. So what is it about the human mind that takes this thing that I am experiencing and seeing right now around me and makes us believe that that is the whole of reality? Are we so uncomfortable with the unknown, here there may be dragons, that we just stick our fingers in our ears and say, la, 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 I'm not listening? I mean, we make fun of the ostrich sticking its head in the sand, right?
Right.
The old-fashioned image, and yet that's equivalent to the same thing, right?
It really is. And, as you were saying that, I was like, yeah, is it a survival mechanism? Will we just be overstimulated with like the spectrum of reality that'll just be too much and we needed to like minimize our focus to survive? But you're right. But then again, like if you're sticking your head in the sand, then how is that a great survival mechanism either? You're just ignoring the fact that there is a vastness that goes beyond yourself. And that, I guess, is very uncomfortable when you want to limit and control. And
I mean, it seems like functionally some flaw in our human programming. I mean, extreme examples are people who, no offense to the flat earthers, who believe the earth is flat. I mean, that's literally lacking dimension.
Works in two-dimensional theory very well.
And or to put it in a religious context, I had a friend who said, I believe the earth is only 6,000 years old. And with those kinds of pronouncements, I can't prove the earth isn't flat either. But in order to believe that, you would have to discount all of science, all of our evolutionary theory, all of our geology, all of our archaeology, all of our galactic science, all of our cosmology. Everything we know from every discipline points to the fact that there are millions upon millions of stars in the cosmos that would have taken billions of years to create. And even our own planet is 4 billion years and change old. Mm-hmm. And all things point in the same direction. And yet you believe your worldview that says it's only 6,000 years old is the correct one. I mean,
right.
how do you stick your fingers in your ears and get to that perspective? The level of blinders you would have to put on makes my brain hurt. It just makes my brain hurt.
It really does. And it's actually kind of tragic because I feel like that storyline is a lot less magical and a lot more limiting than the actual larger vantage score. There is conspiracy though, and I can I can tell you about it all. So the reason why we still have archaeological disciplines and interns and students like I was, is because we actually went out in the night and we planted dinosaur bones. We got extra credit for it. It was fantastic.
You were very, very busy. You probably recruited Santa and the elves to do it because you needed that sled. You needed the sleigh to go around and get it all done really fast. Just saying. Well, but I mean, we can joke about this, but that's why the subject of UFOs is such an interesting and rich one on so many levels. I mean, Chris and I were joking. We both have connections to the astrological community, the pagan community, the magic community. These are also places where large parts of the public think they're all insane. And if I'm honest with myself, I have to agree that many people in these communities are actually not playing with a full deck because critical thinking seems to go out the window sometimes when you get attached to beliefs. Right. But, just because some folks are a little crazy doesn't mean there's not a kernel of truth there. And it seems also in our brains, we too easily get caught up in black or white thinking. You know, it's all this or it's all that. There's no in between gray area. It seems like we are as uncomfortable with uncertainty as we are with mystery. And so we latch on to things without possibility or space of the unknown. And so I write articles on Medium from time to time. And I met an astronomer who writes for all kinds of publications. And I started commenting on some of his articles, which were very well done. And he kept deleting all of my posts because he knows I'm an astrologer. And therefore, I'm banned from
That's a shame.
his conversations about anything remotely involving the astrology word. And I'm like, dude, I'm in Mensa. I have great appreciation for what you do. And you can't even have a dialogue then.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, out of all the astrologers in all the worlds, I think I'm like one of the more reasonable ones. But then just listen to what I just said. We always think we're the reasonable one, even if we're the crazy one. And so it becomes a very interesting conversation to have, because when you're talking about things where proof is possible and yet nebulous, it makes the UFO conversation really interesting. So, in the research that I've been doing, if you've been watching the news, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Pentagon leaked a couple of the bits of evidence, that's video evidence that it's going to include in its presentation to the public, shots of its unidentified aerial phenomenon that were taken off the coast of California. It was one of them. I don't remember where the other one was from. United States Navy pilots, and I think it was the other one was Air Force, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Who witnessed objects that were confirmed by radar flying in patterns that cannot be duplicated by things in the United States air arsenal. And they're like, we don't know. We just don't know. And it's so funny listening to journalists like, well, what could it be? We don't know. Well, is it aliens? We don't know. And how many ways can we say we don't know?
Seriously. I mean, it also takes a lot of courage just to say we don't know, rather than just like, oh, we're just going to assume something and then throw that out there and just mislead people. I like the I don't know answer.
So they're doing a lot of I don't know, which, I mean, if we are honest, is the only intellectually honest answer. Because if we have video evidence, they've ruled out it's probably not other countries. So what else is there? If it's weather phenomenon, it's a weather phenomenon we don't understand. I read one article, someone was saying, well, it could have been time travelers from Earthlings' future. It could be. It could be.
Very plausible. That's
Can't disprove that either. So I think this is going to be a really interesting time if people are willing to really dig down and explore the implications of the conversation, whether we are not alone in the cosmos, but really how we define reality, because how we define reality is so very important to the way we're treating each other right now, right?
It absolutely is. And then, it brings you back to like the experiences with, many indigenous communities, and also with plant medicines and stuff like that. And just how aliens and UFOs, they're a common occurrence. You can see them in artwork throughout the time of humanity. And that's a beautiful thing. And I always feel like it brings in this other dimensional, fourth sort of dimensional sort of travel agency, fourth dimensional travel agency.
That's a great book title. That's a good book title. Put that on
Douglas
your list.
Adams again for that. Yeah, that would be great. So anyway, I was reminded of Pablo Amaringo was an ayahuasquero for many years, and she had a photographic memory. To kind of put that work behind him and just dove into his painting and just documented experience after experience, because that memory recall was just amazing. And it's really beautiful artwork. I mean, similar to the Shipibo patterns that you would see. So it's very much ayahuasca and induced sort of art. But the experiences and the multi-plane and the dimensions of reality that you can see in there is a perfect example of what that kind of experience is. And they're paralleled cross culturally, whether it's pictographs or petroglyphs. And you can see a lot of the paintings of the UFOs and aliens, and now whether those are plant entities or different entities, what have you, doesn't really matter, and the state of which doesn't really matter either. They're just, it's there. It's beyond our primarily dominant reality. There are other things, and I feel like those rare occurrences, they kind of slip through the cracks. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they're just there is this interdimensional sort of flux that happens that or maybe they pop in just to like, the interstellar tricksters and just like throwing people off. Very plausible too.
Let's consider what we do know from our limited state of mind, that
We don't know.
that physically speaking, our current state of physics says nothing can go faster than the speed of light. And if nothing can go faster than the speed of light, and you have to propel something through the cosmos in 3 dimensions, it would take 4.5 years to get to the closest star that's near the Earth, and literally hundreds of thousands of years to get to many things.
Unless you're folding space.
Well, that's what I'm going to say. Through 3 dimensions and pushing, and then that's not even considering the time dilation effects that it would create on the people that were traveling that way. All of this ground has been covered in good sci-fi, and Chris and I are both way too versed in sci-fi.
Not an ideal way of travel.
Exactly. So, in the Star Trek world, they have the impulse drive, which pushes people through normal space. It speeds some fraction of the speed of light, but then they had to have warp drive, and warp drive was the folding of space that Chris is just talking about. It goes into a hyperspace, an altered space, to get the ship there faster. So, and then there's the third kind that you just alluded to, of actual things in other dimensions working at the speed of thought. So we either are talking about a technology that has to have the capacity to move it through some kind of hyperspace, fold space, create artificial wormholes or something, all the things that have been covered in sci-fi, or we have to have something that's working on the level of thought in order to be able to instantaneously go to different parts of the cosmos. So if either one of those are possible, and there are visitors here, the question is, well, why? And my answer to that would be, well, why not? I mean, it's a big cosmos. I mean,
exactly. Who doesn't want to travel after last year? Like, do you really care where you go?
Seriously. I mean, yes, it's huge. And here's where I think it's okay to be a little proud of what we are. I don't think we have to take our pride from being the only ones. I think we can be proud of being unique, and every civilization that emerges would have its own things, and you would want to go. If I were an alien with the capacity to go visiting places, I would be jazzed. I'm like, oh, what do they do here? What do they do here? And how did they move through those states of consciousness? How are they relating to the world? I want to go see. I have a lot of sympathy for going planet hopping. I think that would be a fun thing to do. So
it would be amazing.
And I know, but I don't feel it has to be a threatening thing, because I completely agree with the argument that if some race, some intelligence is sophisticated enough to be able to move through time and space by whatever means, and they're here, they already have the capacity to flatten us. If they really wanted to, we're toast.
Thank you.
If they really wanted to. So we wouldn't be having this conversation. They're already here, and we are still here too. Ergo, the logical answer to that is they're not unfriendly. And if they were, we would have no time to pack our bags, because, poof. We would be like that. What's the Vogon fleet?
Yes, exactly.
In the Douglas Adams that came by, they made an announcement, and
imminent domain.
Poof, the planet was gone. So being fearful of that is crazy.
It absolutely is. I'm glad you brought that up, because that actually, several years ago, that was a big thing that was coming up. Primarily, Stephen Hawking was a big proponent of that. That most likely that if there are aliens, they will be our enemies. They would be like this slave dominating force out for our resources. everything that we are ashamed about of being human, and like our darkest enemies and our darkest shadows and darkest dragons, just projecting that out on any external force. And that's just that reflective game that just leads nowhere at all. And I thought that was very sad. But you haven't seen that too often in the last several years. Like that storyline calmed quite a bit. I mean, we had a virus, but
Honestly, that would be my biggest fear for like interacting with alien worlds. Would be the same fear that we have of melting permafrost. That cross species contact always brings with it risks. But once again, if the aliens are smart enough to get here, then they're also smart enough to recognize this. And maybe they do a better job of vaccinating than we do. I don't know, maybe. So.
Maybe, right? It's always because you got to bring that towel with you wherever you go. It's your cosmic passport. Just always wipe things down. Many uses.
You brought up being able to move in time, which getting farther out because everything is connected to the whole community that talks about if we have visitors now, then have we had visitors before? And if we've had visitors before, how does that fit into these massive monuments that we see all over the world that we actually don't know how they got there?
We don't even have the technology to dismantle, let alone build, recreate.
and so people in the archaeological community, as you well know, are not the formal archaeological community, that is. I'm not fond of the concept that aliens did it because, back to Occam's razor, usually the simplest answer is the best. And so I can understand that thinking, but where I get into a problem is I'm okay with the I don't know. I'm not okay with the it's impossible because it still remains. That is another plausible explanation for what happened in our own distant past. That we have been, just because in the last 50 years or so, actually longer than that, 1940s were how many, 80 years ago now?
Wow. Yeah.
Just because we don't have photographic evidence that people agree on that extraterrestrial intelligence is landing on the lawn of the White House.
Right. It's a real reason why I have so many iPhone upgrades, so to enhance that camera so we can get better non-blurry photos.
Doesn't mean that in the past, alien intelligence hasn't landed and interacted.
Right.
And it might be because now we have planes and are in such an overwhelming place of fear. If I were visiting exoplanets and I knew the poor denizens of the planet had some vague concept that there was something out there in the cosmos and they were terrified and they were going around shooting their pop guns at it. I mean, even if the pop guns were not going to hurt me, I'd probably stay out of the way just to not upset them.
Oh, absolutely.
Just not to mess with them anymore.
Like, I'm not getting caught up in that drama.
We'll just stay up here and
watch a show.
Anybody got popcorn? Maybe that's what crop circles are all about. Yeah, that is like galactic.
We're the
popcorn.
streaming service for the galaxy. Oh, it's horrible. It's a very
Earth is an intergalactic reality television show.
It might very well be. Prove us wrong. Oh gosh, yeah, no, it's an interesting thing, and that also, these abstract thought concepts. This is always why there's always like this level of discernment, I guess, kind of needed anytime like things are coming from that authority state. Again, what we talked about similar several episodes ago about that trust in those agencies, right? Because there are like theorists, like we're talking about, like, the rise of like the Western capitalistic war machine, the military industrial complex and stuff, how that was moving from a targeted enemy to abstract concepts and abstract enemies and things like that. Like war on everything's a war. We talked about this one time too. war on drugs, war on the climate, war on poverty.
We keep coming back to the same things. There's a
Exactly.
reason for that.
Yes, it's so ridiculous. So there was, I forget the theorist's name, but then he was classified as the fourth stage is that when there isn't a material sort of, and you go through this abstract concept and you keep that whole kind of wheel going, and for money's sake. So if if you get an alert that aliens are invading, I would just hold a breath and maybe just like try to talk.
Well, let's other writers have talked about this, that we have been caught in a world that until the 80s, the enemy at the gate in the United States was the Russians. And they called it the Cold War. Yeah. Before that, there was Nazis. Before that, there was something else. There's always something that keeps us agitated. And once the Cold War ended, we started our own internal culture wars, because it's been argued by some scholars that we didn't have the same kind of pressing external enemy, and so the enemy looked within, and it became the Democrats versus the Republicans in this intense culture war. But when you are fighting with yourself, you don't always look up to see the other, like, more pressing things that are actually happening in the world. In this case, maybe climate change.
Right. No one was reading Rachel Carson.
Silent Spring just didn't happen. And so some people have argued that in order to shift to a global perspective out of national, well, in the case of the United States, internal, requires the concept of an external agency or an external enemy.
Right.
In order to unite the planet so that it becomes us, you enlarge the us.
Right. Like the smashing, earth-destroying asteroid.
Something like that, so that we work together, recognizing that we have more in common than that other thing. It's always the us versus the other. And so the question then becomes, why is all this alien thing happening right now? And is it because we have more cell phones and so more evidence is coming, whether they like it or not, which is a possibility? Or is it because someone is realizing that we need an external possibility or an external enemy to get us to think differently about what it means to be human, and to stop worrying about artificial lines drawn on a planet and start thinking more collectively.
Exactly, especially in this time of crisis where we are going to have a lot more climate risk. People are going to have to move. That's just it obviously is a constant and changing, just a fact of life. But you can't have those archaic boundaries anymore. Like, they're just blurred by nation lines or creed, and it doesn't work anymore. It's archaic.
Full disclosure, I am legitimately a globalist Illuminati. And I'm okay with it, that I am a living, walking globalist Illuminati. I'm globalist because since the time I was in high school, I got sent off to an international boarding school, and I was educated in an international system with students from 70 different other countries. And so my roommates were from Palestine and Canada and France, and I had friends who were Colombian and Russian and so on. And that's where I grew up. So for me, the concept of national borders doesn't make any sense, because my friends were from everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's the world we're moving into with the internet, and people can make these kind of cross-cultural connections. And yet there's a holdout of, no, I want my little space, because we're always afraid of the unknown, and the future is also an unknown. And, well, my Hermetic teacher was from Germany, and Germany is where the Illuminati are from. There were actually a group of metaphysicians in the southern part of Germany back in the 1700s, 1800s, and so very likely I am a direct initiate descendant. So I'm sure I will get hate mail from somebody who follows us on Twitter. We do have a Twitter account, so if you really feel like you need to, go take it out on Twitter.
It's at Magic and Mastery.
It's at Magic and Mastery. There you go. Who invites the trolls to just get PR? So I wonder that when making the calculations, is it just because Is it just because we have too many iPhones and the more people take pictures, the harder this is going to be to suppress? Are there just enough? Has it been in the culture so long that we have members of Congress who have been begging to release this information? Is it because other countries are already releasing the information? I mean, Americans are in such a bubble anyway. They don't necessarily know what's going on in Canada or France or anybody else who's gone make the steps to put this out to the world. Or is it because we actually need to start thinking on a global level, and this is a very effective tool? Or maybe all of the above. Maybe it's just we're all part of this cosmic plan unfolding, and so this is the moment. But I actually never thought I would see this in my lifetime, which is why I'm so excited about what's going to happen. I mean, even if very little happens because of our news cycles, we might see this flash and it goes away. I just know enough about the news to see these things keep coming out that we may start paying more attention, at least for a little while this time. Especially, I mean, we've all been a pandemic. We need something to entertain us. So.
Oh, absolutely. We may have a new guest host from Alpha Centauri coming on in the near future. That'd be fantastic.
I won't even need a Ouija board for that. At least I hope not.
No, but you're absolutely right, and I do feel like there is that to that degree, because we are facing the main problems that we are facing collectively on planet Earth is they're collective issues. It doesn't matter what country you are in; they are totally universal. So I do sort of agree with you on that one. That it does feel like it is a little conditioning to open up that expansion. You know, let's get into the more of that, because there's a lot of fear around like New World Order and global community and loss of individuality and all, again, because anytime you're stepping into anything new, it's always horrifying. Not necessarily always horrifying. It's not always horrifying.
It's only horrifying because we identify. I mean, the chemicals for fear and excitement are the same brain chemicals.
Yeah.
We just label them differently depending on context.
Of course.
If you redefine your reaction as fear versus excitement, I mean, this should be exciting.
No,
as
it's
fantastic. Wave my flag, hail to Vega. We should all sing hail to Vega.
We can do that. We can totally help that. I'll be part of the exercise. Yeah, no, I think it's utterly fascinating, and it's been going on for a while. Like, there's like, you shared an article with me with they talked about Stephen Greer about the Disclosure Project, but there's a few other ones that I want to kind of mention. Like Richard Dolan was another investigator, kind of like he was primarily, I guess, within that judicial committee that were trying to release the doc. This was back when. You just mentioned it a little while ago when France and Canada were releasing their documents. I think it was like 2012, 2013-ish. Don't quote me on it. But they were trying to get the U.S. to follow suit, and they wouldn't. But they put out a lot of research over the years. And Linda Moulton Howe of Earth Files is pretty cool. And there's a place called Project Camelot that has another resource for all these interesting research, interesting articles. One of my favorite researchers on this topic is Gary Bobroff. He's actually a Jungian, and he has this concept of archetypal nature. But I think his book based on the dissertation was Crop Circles, Jung, and the Reemergence of the Archetypal Feminine. And his big premise on that was like, because the crop circles are taking, place in live cornfields and into the archaeological, like the Demeter and Ceres sort of archetype, that there's this masculine sort of was it left brain, right brain? I'm forgetting my brains. Help me out on that one. Anyway, this more abstract poetic imagery that's coming through, helping us to kind of look beyond that rigid analytical side of our brains and open up to that wider sense of mystery that's just out there, and it's like a perpetual reminder happening.
Yes.
And
artists are the only ones operating on the right side of their brain. That's how you remember. Just saying.
All right, fair enough. Thank you. I always cross my wires, so I try to get that diurnal beats going on. But anyway, fascinating stuff.
There is another excellent example, though, of maybe it's not that we have too many iPhones. Maybe it's that we are legalizing marijuana and other things that is going to force us into contact with extra dimensional intelligences.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, plant allies are potent, and cannabis is an amazing one to also touch back into that feminine side too. You know, it is the female strain that has the THC. I think you're right. I think you're right.
So, all these possibilities for what is happening right now are vast, but we can't possibly, we may never know the answer.
It's true.
That's the thing. We may never, we may have to just sit with the enormous mystery of it all. And we just don't like that as a species. We just like to poke things until we know for sure and we can define it and quantify it and stick our little measuring rod up against it. And therefore, we feel like we have conquered it. And because we have conquered it, we are now the masters of it. And there's a reason this podcast is called Magic and Mastery, because we need both, but in proper proportion. We need the magic. The magic is the mystery. But we also need to be able to, within that huge sphere, learn how to surf. But recognize the limits of our surfboards. And how to do it skillfully is the project of a lifetime.
Well put. I can't follow that up.
All right, well, here's a question for you. Have you ever seen a UFO?
I thought I did.
Okay.
Twice.
Talk about it.
Well, I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to also not make myself sound completely crazy, Donna. No, this had to been about 2009. Yeah, I wasn't on any substances. Fairly certain. Fairly certain, Donna. I wasn't on any substances. Maybe once on mushrooms, but I can't recall that. But anyway, so I definitely, how if you live in an area long enough, you recognize flight pattern. And when there's like, all right, planes just never travel in this direction and this low, right? So, okay. So I had that one experience. Well, I'm not sure if it was back-to-back nights. They were very close together. But this very low flying, the black triangle, almost like look like a stealth bomber type of thing, right? I wouldn't be able, very low, like above the tree line, and just slowly flying north, like right over me. Because I'm like out like 4 a.m, 3 a.m. Because I'm a night owl, and also like I like to go back outside and explore the world, play with the foxes and stuff around by me. And so like I, will notice things that maybe people are just asleep for. And that was very weird because it was this, it had the 3 orbed lights on either side and just coasting over and coasting north. But never like, I guess what you would see, like the typical sort of flashing, zigzagging lights that people would see off in the distance. I've heard many stories of those. I had a curious sighting maybe a month ago in Arizona. I can't confirm whether that was a UFO or just an anomaly. It was strange.
A UAP, an unidentified aerial phenomenon.
Yeah, and it was doing a really weird light pattern. There was 2, and it was doing really funky light patterns above the mountains. And this is at night, and again, like I was getting used to the flight patterns because I'm like looking at the sky all the time. So we're like, interesting. And I was curious, but I didn't know. My recorder wasn't up to snuff either to film anything, but so limited personal sightings. More of like definitely encountered like alien type entities, like either in my work or dream states and stuff like that. But nothing like really too much with the UFO, the UAP phenomenon, unfortunately. Sorry, everyone. That was kind of disappointing.
That wasn't disappointing. I feel perpetually disappointed that all this time that I've spent staring up at the sky, I have never seen something fly through it other than a satellite and meteors. But then I'm half blind, but I'm like you, like I sense so much in the cosmos that it's hard to define mean, the difference between an angelic presence and a spirit presence and an alien presence is a very nebulous line in my world. So I know there are a lot of New Age people that like to say, oh, I am talking to a spirit who is from the seventh planet, from the star Reticula, and they look like lizard people. And I don't feel the need to define it that precisely.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, agreed.
some people might need that. We have no way of saying it's true or not true, but that's never been my experience of, I mean, for me, it's more like somewhere between a pressure and a bright light that of an indistinct blobby thing.
I know you're talking on that one too.
Or I am just half blind and really see most people as indistinct blobby things. So
That's hilarious. But yeah, I mean, the channeling of different star systems is super interesting. I feel like I know I definitely had an affinity towards one, and it's still like anytime there's either some kind of event going on or some maybe I'm meditating on it a little bit more or what have you, there's always some sort of heavy amount of synchronicity that would follow around and orbit around it. And those kind of things come through in my fiction quite a bit. I'll like to talk about that, or I'll be doing something and then in the real world it will come and counter it. So I do feel like there's an affinity to these certain locations, or it doesn't even have to be a particular location. It could be also a point in time. And is that some sort of ancestral karmic memory? And I feel like, yes and no. And there's also just some things just stir our particular imaginations, and that they're both good. It's all good. Autumn agrees.
to summarize, humans, as long as we know they've been here, have been looking up at the stars. Best show on Earth every night, especially when you don't have cable. Drawing depictions of what they see, whether it's in terms of the constellations or particular figures or the Pleiades. So as long as we have had art, we've had expressions of our connection to the celestial realm. There have been talk of gods or elves or other things that we might in today's sci-fi world refer to as alien, which I find so very telling. I actually did my graduate thesis on, the title was Alienating News, and it was all about how we other people in our context, and it was about some of the laws they were trying to pass in California vis-a-vis illegal immigration, and how people in Mexico reported on it very differently than people in the United States, the same exact laws, because we like to other things. And so our word for extraterrestrials is alien, the true other out there. And I find that fascinating given our current issues in the United States with aliens crossing the border, and that it just gets tied up into that continual conversation about othering.
Yeah.
So I suppose we'll be totally horrified if we find out that there are extraterrestrials in orbit that are crossing our borders illegally. We send ICE after them.
Shoot on sight. Oh, it's horrible.
You're going to have to build a much bigger wall.
And a part of me does hope that like the aliens out there are like our lost little brothers or sisters that we split off, like one went to Earth and the other ones.
Can you imagine if extraterrestrial intelligence has any kind of connection with the way we conceive of the cosmos? They must have some. I mean,
well, then they're not far from us, because if they're watching what we're watching and getting, I don't know, it's questionable taste.
If they land on the White House lawn and they listen to the conversations that go on, how would they respond to a Fox News commentator?
I'm assuming they'll think everyone on planet Earth is high.
No, they would be better behaved if they were high. My personal ego hubris tends to think that we all have our reality bubbles are all too small. That by definition, our reality bubbles is way too small. But I look at other people and I do say, I know this is part of my own hubris, but your reality is like really, really small. If I feel like that about some of my fellow humans, despite my telling myself to be tolerant and everything else a million times over, what in the world would someone who was from another planet say about my reality bubble? How very, very, very small it must be.
They might just like poke a finger out and like, whoop. Yeah, I mean, I think that is a good place to stop, and it's absolutely true. And I think about that often myself. Like putting yourself literally in the alien shoes would be really interesting. Because then again, because you and I were thinking just as human beings. That is our as far as we can press our reality bubble, technically, because everything else would be it's totally subjective.
I was checking out the surveys of how people would respond to some demonstrative of proof that there is truly other life in the cosmos. And most people were fine with it. I thought that was actually a positive sign when they were doing surveys, that there wasn't going to be a massive freak out. As much as the government, most of these revelations from the United States government, I mean, they are also revealing that they've been lying a lot.
Yeah.
They don't like saying, I don't know. And the fact that they're not saying, I don't know, I mean, they're willing to say that now, I think is a big step forward for them, because if they don't know, they've said, don't say anything. Just shut up, or you're going to lose your job or something like that.
Right. And there is this whole past history of, government working with Hollywood to kind of ease the collective storyline around a lot of these topics, which is a whole nother topic in itself. And people might have fun going down that rabbit hole. But there is this level of easing people, this fear that people would just automatically freak out, like Orson Welles and War of the Worlds, that type of level of a broadcast, causing a lot of disruption. So then, like, that we would need to be kind of nurtured and kind of conditioned to accept wider realities. I don't have an opinion on it. I feel like it's wrong in either case, but
I'd like to think that we are at least not going to freak out. That truly, if a flying saucer landed someplace, that we would respond without having to shoot at it.
I hope so too. I mean, everyone is kind of inside just watching that little blue light TV fix. Who's outside to actually see anything happening?
Could you tell the difference? I mean, you mentioned World of the Worlds. Would we be able to tell the difference between a reality television show and reality?
Well, maybe that's why the 5G network is in place. You're gonna beam everyone in. Yeah, no, I think it's super interesting, and it's kind of all right. Obviously, last year was an anomaly, but I've been doing my night walks for a long time, and I'm talking about even if I went out, it's about 9 o'clock for me Eastern time. Went out here. All right, it was raining all day, so it's a bad example all around. If it was a beautiful sunny day all day long, if I go out at night, obviously no one's going to be out. I'll be walking by myself, and I know everyone's just huddled in their little huts and around the TV altar, and that's just their experience of life. It's very passive. It's very much just what we are watching and consuming. So I'm being a little more of a pessimist on this. We'll be outside. Donna and I will be out with our towels, and we'll be hitching a ride.
Trying to hitch a ride.
Just don't panic.
Sometimes it's hard to respond when it's... I met him once. He was awesome.
You told me. Yeah.
I have tons of respect for Douglas Adams and the way he was thinking about things, because he was truly ahead of his time in a lot of ways. Those kinds of stories. I mean, we are storytelling creatures. And so our stories of friendly extraterrestrials, or at least amused extraterrestrials, are just as potent for us as the Independence Day ones who simply blow things up. And so we've had years in our collective conscious to choose our own adventure. Which way will we think of things? Yeah. And I think we're just finally getting to the point where maybe we can see that it's not so scary after all. Maybe. I guess we'll find out in a month. we were talking about what would be an appropriate experiment for this episode. And we didn't think it was quite right to make you go outside and with your towels and try to flag down the fleet. So instead, we were thinking that maybe imagine a world where...
Imagine a world.
Exactly. Where extraterrestrial life is a certainty. How would you respond to that world? Or, if you want a second question, not truly an experiment, but a great thing to try out, which I just got from Chris. Imagine you are one of those visiting extraterrestrials. How would you consider what you observe? And think about it and see what you discover. What does that tell you about your concepts of reality? How's that?
That's perfect.
Now, that was a fun episode, wasn't it? If you'd like to learn more about what we do in my School of Magic and Mastery, I highly recommend that you check out my new introductory level course called Secrets of Moon Magic. It'll give you everything that you need to tune into the power of polarity to shape your own life using your relationship with the moon. You can find out more about the course at www.magicandmastery.com/moon. Chris and I hope you enjoyed this particular podcast. I know I had fun making it. And if you like what you heard, I do hope you'll take a minute to surf on over to wherever you listen to podcasts and rate and review our podcast, because that's what helps us understand what you love. And if you like it, why don't you share it with a friend?